do believe that the individual that can control their attention and their focus the most and increase their attention span on what they're doing, they can make way more progress, especially as a leader, because then they're more present with the person that they're with. They can actively listen. They can give the advice where they're not just with you, but you could tell they're kind of looking through you, thinking about what they're going to eat for dinner. Did they leave the door open? Did they unlock? Like, they're everywhere else, and you can just sense it in their body language and their eyes. You're like, oh yeah, she didn't hear anything I said.
Apparently, a goldfish has a better attention span than the modern human. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but today it's one of the many and varied subjects we'll be discussing with my guest, Derick Johnson, who is a life coach and trainer. He's helped over 500 clients and 50 companies go from just surviving to thriving. He also spent 10 years in the US Army and is very passionate about fitness, getting the best from your life, and leveraging your attention span. So we're going to be talking about all of those things and more, and not forgetting, of course, the leadership lessons learned from his varied and interesting career so far. It's going to be a great one, and I'm sure, listener, that your attention span is better than a goldfish because you are still here, hopefully, and a goldfish would have stopped listening or forgotten about it by now.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Derick, thank you for joining me this morning. To kick us off, I'm going to hand over to you really to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what you do today, what gets you out of bed in the morning, especially so early.
Okay, for sure. So it's a pleasure being here. I appreciate you having me. And what gets me up early, honestly, is just to become better. And I've been telling myself this for years, is in my head or out loud. I just say, people depend on me. People depend on me. So my girlfriend and I, we don't have kids. We have a dog, we have a pit bull. But in general, is that I always believe that within the first 30 minutes to an hour of your day, it should be dedicated to our mental health and our physical health. If we can do one thing for the mind and one thing for the body, we can show up better for others, whether that's at work, whether that's online, if it's our neighbors, whoever it is, before we interact with people and apps and everything else. We just have to set our day up for success. So I'm a huge component of the morning routine. I grew up as an athlete, and I was also in the US Army for 10 years. So getting up early has just been a natural thing. And also, I grew up, my father was in the Army. So as a child, I would wake up and I'd see my mom doing yoga in the living room, or like DVD tapes and cassette tapes, fitness tapes in the living room. And my dad would be running or going to the gym. So it was just instilled in me, just second nature. Get up, hydrate, work out, then start your day. And so the intent of waking up is just always thinking people depend on me. So essentially, if I take care of me first, if we take care of ourselves, we can show up with better energy for others. Because we've all done it in reverse, where we wake up, we've hit snooze 6 times, stress goes up, anxiety goes up, we're in traffic, Wi-Fi is not working, coffee machine didn't work, and then we're just reactive to everything, or we're just annoyed. So I'm a big component on early morning wake-ups. I don't necessarily tell my clients when to wake up or people. I just do recommend that they get at least 30 minutes to themselves. That could just be walking their dog or sitting in their backyard, wherever they are, but reset the mind before they absorb the world, the media, information, their tasks from work. So what can you do to set up your day for success so you feel like you're proactive and not just reactive to everything and everyone?
I'm sure it's good advice. I think in the modern world where we live in, though, and this is a known problem, isn't it? Particularly the screen time and the phone always there, always on, and that kind of the interaction between work and the rest of your life. And yes, a lot of people really do struggle to switch off. So, I mean, how do you help people to do that better?
So what I challenge them to do is to see how they can be more present, because nowadays people are always on apps. Our phones are amazing. Opportunities can get created. They help us, but they also distract most people. So I do feel like the biggest issue with most people is they don't have control of their attention. So they're always checking notifications. If their screen lights up, they have to check it. It's email. It's my friend. It's another meme, another funny video. It's work. It's this, it's that. Like, they're just all over the place. So I would definitely recommend that they turn off their notifications when it comes to social media, unless it's related to their career or their job or business. Then yes, it's understandable they need it and use it. But in general, I feel like many people, for example, let's just say Instagram and TikTok. If most people are always looping on those apps, I would recommend turning off notifications, or they could simply uninstall and reinstall, like uninstall in the morning or reinstall it at night when they finish or on lunch, and basically just setting up more digital doors that they have to go through to go to the app if they feel like they're addicted to that thing. Because I do believe everyone does have a addiction cycle with apps. Is it could be Facebook, then Instagram, then they check their Amazon cart, then they check email, then they put their phone away. Everybody has their own little loop that they do. So if they can identify their loop and ask themselves, how often am I jumping in these apps? At first, if they can guess, it feels good. But then once if they can go into the app and look at their screen time, they can see Mondays is 2 hours, Wednesdays is 20 minutes. The apps will tell us, and they might be mind blown to see how much time they actually waste or spend in a good way on these apps. So I would definitely go step one is have hyper awareness of how much time you spend on the apps. Go into your phone, and then into the apps individually, you can go into the settings and it'll show you your screen time, like with charts of the days of the week. I like to look at the one on Instagram. That's the app that I enjoy most, especially for business and just making content. So that one's much higher than the other apps, but it is interesting to see like what day of the week it's lower, what day it's higher, and then sometimes it's not at all. So having someone have hyper awareness of their app usage can help a lot, because then they at least know where their time is going to. And then they can say, wait, I spend 4 hours a week, a month, and they're like 16 hours a month. Like, that's a whole day. What am I doing? So some people might be surprised in a good way or in a bad way. But from there, then they can assess things, because I do believe we all are addicted to these devices to an extent. For some people, it's not in a bad way. But for some, it's just like, all right, maybe they could just scroll less and send less funny videos to their friends.
Yeah, it is way too easy, isn't it, to just lose hours of your life in the feed. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. We're almost dependent on them, aren't we, at this stage? I think there's so much of our lives, like professional and personal, if the phone stops working for whatever reason, people get withdrawal from it, don't they? It's documented. It's kind of scary. And another angle for it, and something that I've experienced in a past role or two, is coming at it from the professional side of it and thinking about it as a manager, as a leader. And I think there is, or there should be now, a responsibility to think about how you are impacting people's lives outside of work. For the story behind it for me was, one of the best things I ever did with my phone in my last job was turn off my email notifications entirely.
Oh, yeah.
Because the number of emails late at night or 2 a.m. from the, let's say, overperforming executive team.
Yes, exactly.
and it has a massive impact on like your mental health and your level of stress and your ability to sleep, even if you know that email might be popping in at any hour of the night.
100%.
Yeah, so I think there's a leadership lesson there as well about how you think about when you're emailing. Like if you are working in the middle of the night, you know that's fine. You're the leader. Maybe you're the owner of the company. That's your prerogative. But you don't have to immediately send the email. You can do a scheduled send, so it won't pop out until 9 o'clock the next morning, for example.
100%.
And it goes both ways, I think. Anyway, rant over.
Yeah, and another thing I feel like many people can relate to is the notification assumption, as in they think they're getting a notification and their phone is in their pocket or on the table, and we feel our pocket vibrate, and then you realize your phone is across the room, and you're like, and then you check it, and you actually have a notification. You're like, all right, this is getting weird. Because then you can feel it, and you assume you're getting a notification, and the phone's not even on your body or in your pocket. And so those moments are interesting, because then you can really see who's addicted to their phone or who's just touching it too much. Because then you're like, did I really think my pocket was vibrating and it wasn't even in my pocket? All right, let me go out in nature for an hour. turning off all devices. I'm going outside.
Yeah, that's a definite warning sign, isn't it? That a line has been crossed. I think this is kind of related to my next question for you, which is, I mean, mental health is a big issue now, and it seems to be, I don't know if it's getting more attention or if it's just becoming more of a problem for more people, and if it's related to what we've just been talking about. Why is it, do you think, that people struggle mentally so much these days?
I think because of the lack of attention span, it's hard for people to get the progress that they want because they get interrupted by things. So outside of the apps, it could be their thoughts from the past, the what if scenarios of the future, the am I good enough, comparing themselves to somebody else online or in their circle or in public. So I do believe that people's attention span is lower, and there's actually a study that shows goldfish, the animal, the goldfish literally have a higher attention span than humans. I always thought that was funny. I found that out about 5 years ago. If you look this up, they've done many studies on it. So little goldfish in a little bowl has a higher attention span than humans. So with that being said, it's like we're legitimately competing with goldfish. So it sounds funny, but it's also scary because then you can see who has attention, who doesn't. So I do believe that the individual that can control their attention and their focus the most and increase their attention span on what they're doing, they can make way more progress, especially as a leader, because then they're more present with the person that they're with. They can actively listen. They can give the advice where they're not just with you, but you could tell they're kind of looking through you, thinking about what they're going to eat for dinner. Did they leave the door open? Did they unlock? Like they're everywhere else, and you can just sense it in their body language and their eyes. You're like, oh yeah, she didn't hear anything I said. And then sometimes they can sprinkle in a random question and they won't even notice. But I do believe it is attention span, lack of attention span, because they do not have control, total control of their focus, whether it's from apps, in person, intrusive thoughts, negative thoughts, thinking about the next thing, thinking if they're not in the level in life they want to be or should be by their age. There's just a lot of things depending on the individual. But I have noticed that that's a common pattern with people is they don't have control of their focus, especially if it's not something that they're totally passionate about. So somebody loves sports and they're playing soccer, they're very present. They're moving their body. If they love playing piano, if they love watching movies, playing video games, people are present in the things that they enjoy. But when it comes to workflow, it is difficult for some to get into a flow state without an interruption. But once they do gain the power of their self-awareness and the power of their attention span, they can test themselves. So an example somebody could use is, at what time of day am I most creative? Maybe it's between 6 and 8 a.m. And they say, you know what, this part of my work project, I'm going to use then, if they work in those hours. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And they say, you know what, I'm going to do this one after work so it can prepare me for tomorrow. But if they can take advantage of their time gap windows on where they have the deepest work done, depending on their attention span of time of day. So like with myself, I love early mornings. After the gym, I'm ready. My mind is open and I can create. Others, they're like 6 a.m., can't even think straight. I'm not creating anything. I'm not hitting record. So it all depends on the person, but they can capitalize on that. And that will slowly elevate their confidence, which then leads to them feeling like they do have control of their time, and that'll spill into other things. So if they choose one or two things to use to their advantage with times and create a time gap, people are probably familiar with the Pomodoro effect, 20 minutes on or 80 minutes on, 20 minutes off, 15 on, 10 off. Like people can make up their own variation, but it's the 80-20 rule. So something you're passionate about, your attention span is going to be a lot longer. And maybe something that's more difficult, I would recommend that people take breaks. So if they go 20 minutes on and before they get past that 20 minutes and just go blank and mess up the system or read something and they didn't realize what they're reading, they're like 5 pages in, have no clue what I just read. So before that time comes, they take a break, 5 minutes, and I always recommend to go in nature. Go look at the rain, walk your dog, walk down the street, whatever the weather's like, just reset and then get back to it. And they'll realize that those small chunks in the day when they're actually focused, they get a lot more done because they're in deep flow state. So going back to your question, I do believe it is people do not have control of their focus and their attention span is lower than ever. So they feel like they're never getting anything done. This is at 20% completion. This is at 70. This is at 45. And they're just like, can I just finish one thing? and then somebody else needs them, then they get a notification. So it's a very common thing that I've noticed. People have many tasks that are just floating, and feel like they're drowning sometimes because nothing is completed to their liking.
Yeah, it's all the spinning plates, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the goldfish comparison is funny or depressing because
it's honestly both. The first time I heard that, I was like, "No, it's not." Then I looked it up. I was like, holy!
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the goldfish is famously only has 30-second memory, I think it is. So it might have a better attention span, but it will forget it within a minute. So we're okay. We're still winning. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find all of that really interesting. I think one of the, particularly in terms of understanding your own working pattern, because everyone is different. And it was something I never really thought about either until I had a very similar conversation to this with someone, actually. And when I sat down and thought about it, I don't want to say it was life-changing, but maybe profession-changing. I don't know. Is that a thing? That can be a thing.
Yes, definitely.
But understanding that I'm at my most productive between the hours of 7 and about 10:30 means that if I have detailed work that I know needs all my concentration, that's when I'll book that in to do that kind of work. And then I'll do things like this or phone calls or things that require slightly less brain power in the nicest possible way. I'll book in the afternoon or coming up towards lunchtime. And that has really, it's given me quite a powerful shift, I think, in the way that I work. It helps to have control of your own fate in terms of running your own business and being a solopreneur, because you can't always have that sort of say over it when you're an employee.
Exactly.
But certainly it has made things a lot more productive. And then the other thing that stands out from what you've said to me is sitting in that room with the boss and you just know they're just looking through you, or that whatever you're saying is in one ear and out the other.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing, again, I found really useful to do, it made me think all the way back to when I was at school and we had this teacher. He was a bit of a character, and he just used to do quite a simple but quite an influential thing. Was as soon as he realised that somebody in the room wasn't listening, he just stopped talking. And he would just wait until they realised he'd stopped talking.
Yeah.
And they look up and he'd be like, oh, you're listening now. Right, I'll continue. So I started doing that in meetings with a couple of old bosses and leaders. And it's actually quite interesting, particularly when they're sat there on the BlackBerry and they're sending their emails. You see the thumbs going, you know they're not listening. Just stop talking and see how long it takes before they look up from their phone. My record is 15 minutes, by the way. 15 minutes. Yeah.
Of not talking at all, and they're just sold out.
Before someone realised. Yeah.
Yes.
So again, there's not a leadership lesson there, isn't there? Leave your phone out of the room if you're going to go and have a conversation with someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, yeah, it's funny the little habits we pick up, isn't it, sometimes?
Oh, yes, especially if you see something that worked, whether it's a teacher or a coach. I noticed a lot of things with my parents growing up. My mother's German. My dad's African-American. So my dad was Army, drill sergeant and everything. And my mother, she was a kindergarten teacher for 40 plus years. So there's different techniques that they would use to grab my attention, people's attention, and also just with cultural, like Germans are very structured and serious. And then on my dad's side, he's serious as well, but a little bit laid back. But it is interesting how different cultures have different levels of attention span, or they're just like, it has to get done no matter what. And I've noticed that some cultures or ethnicities, they're more laid back about it. Like, hey, you can get around to it. But definitely with my parents, they were the hard, strict ones. And I really appreciated it because the older I got, I realized that I was able to complete tasks faster. So a big thing that I recommend to people and my clients is I always say speed is key. Speed is key. And I don't mean in part of rushing through things and messing up, but the speed at which we complete a task and we go to the next one. So we close the gap. Because sometimes people, they'll work out one little small thing. It took them 1 minute to send this email. And then they're like, oh, I need a break. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Then they start the next thing. And then they keep having these breaks, which are not even needed, which is different than what we mentioned before. If somebody's doing deep work, then they can just have a 5 to 10 minute reset, go outside, do whatever. But in this regard is that some people, they stretch out projects and they haven't done anything in the 3-hour window because they keep sitting back in their desk, like, oh, sent one email. Start looking around, online shopping, whatever it is. So being able to, speed is key, being able to keep that in their mind, as in, I just completed this, let me go to the next one. So the example that people can relate to is if it's been a morning that they were very productive and they feel like they completed their day by 11 or 12 p.m., 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. Before lunch, they feel like they got all their tasks done. And they're like, wow, this feels great. All they did was just stay focused, have no interruptions, get things done faster. And there was no mistake. So they weren't rushing. They were just completed, check, completed, check, completed, check. And then they kind of tapped out like, oh, it's already 12 o'clock. Let me go have some lunch. This feels awesome. My afternoon's going to be easy. I can just play catch up on other things or prepare for tomorrow. But doing that can really help people because they can realize how much time they're wasting. Earlier, we mentioned scrolling. This time it is, are you taking too long to do your tasks? And are you taking unnecessary breaks? It's just boredom where they're like, just sent 5 emails. I think I need a break. But the 5 emails took them 3 minutes. It's like, do you need a break or do you just need to keep knocking stuff out?
Yeah, I feel like the context makes a big difference there as well. And how well you enjoy your job.
Yes.
Perhaps the interactions with your colleagues, certain workplaces, certain types of job as well, I can see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I sent an email, time for a coffee. Yeah.
Exactly.
We've all done it, right?
Always in the water room or the coffee room or the company kitchen. It's like anytime you go in, he or she's in there, you're like, when do they get work done? They're always in here. They're just always sitting there talking to everybody. Hey, how's it going? What are you having for lunch? And you're like, weren't you just in here 10 minutes ago or 2 hours ago? Like, do you even work here? You just hang out.
Yeah, but I mean, having been that person on occasion, in hindsight, I feel like that was a sign I should have seen about whether I was in the right job. The difference between drill sergeant and kindergarten teacher, that doesn't feel like there'd be a lot of similarities in approach there.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't, but it's just the structure and the focus that I noticed of just getting stuff done, attention span, and it was just instilled, just seeing how quick we did things. And also growing up with a German mother, I grew up as a professional cleaner. My mother did not have a cleaning business, but Germans are just, in my opinion, the cleanest people. So I always was cooking and cleaning the house, and we had a big house in Florida back then. And so I didn't realize how much that helped me till I got older. In in college, when I had my first place, all my friends wanted to come to my apartment. Nobody else was like, man, it's so clean. It smells good. The food is so good. And in my head, I'm like, this is normal. What are you talking about? And then I'd go to their place. I'm like, I'm never going to your place again. Like, this is disgusting. Like, you live like this. And so that's how it was. And then it also helped me in the military to have the cleanest locker, the cleanest bed. Everything was made perfectly, but it was just second nature. It was instilled. So that attention to detail helped a lot. So when I do a task that is faster or somebody has a similar experience, their work quality is much better. Even if it took them less time, it's just second nature to them to get things done faster. But they just have a specific system and they're more aware of doing things. But I totally agree with what you mentioned is that it depends on what somebody's doing. If they're passionate about it, if they care about what they're doing, or maybe the energy of the company and the coworkers, if the morale is high, people are going to do better. If it's down, then it's not going to be so great. That's a big reason I got out of the military. I loved it my first 6 to 7 years, and the last couple of years I was in for 10 years. It just got very negative, and I noticed that I was bringing work home, and I never did that. I'm a positive person, but I would just rant to my girlfriend about it. All right, this and this happened and that. I'm like, and then I just tapped out because I would catch myself. I'm like, I've never done this. I feel like I'm going to turn to that 50-year-old man that's just complaining about work. Nope, time to get out. So then I just went all in on what I'm passionate about and what truly fulfills me.
Yeah, that's, again, a familiar story. And I think, we're lucky, aren't we, in that we had the ability to recognize that firstly, but then secondly, actually do something about it. What type of clients then would usually have the most success in both personal and professional lives, in your experience?
I noticed that number one is athletes. They have that natural competitive mentality, whether they played basketball, whether they played American football or football, soccer, whatever they did, but they naturally want to compete. So they just have that fire in them. So I noticed that they do really well because they love a competitive spirit. And so usually they just need the game plan or the accountability. As long as they know exactly what to do, even if they're the brand new one at work, they're just absorbing everything like a sponge because they're competitive. They don't like to feel like the person, the odd man out or the beginner. So that's why they're more focused and structured, and they'll learn the program, the system, whatever it is in the industry that they're in. So number one, athletes. Number two, people that have been through traumas and that have worked on themselves with self-development. And the reason I mentioned them is because they don't really stress when it comes to work or personal life, because they've seen way worse as a child or as a teen. And so little Wi-Fi, system issues, everyone else like, oh my God, this is, and they're just like, why are you stressed about this? Like, this is the smallest thing. Let's just wait 5 minutes and it's going to reboot. Nothing to stress about. You can always tell by the way that they carry themselves, but because they stress less, they perform better. So they get faster results and better results as well. So you have the competitive athlete, you have an individual who maybe did not play sports, but they've been through a lot of different trauma, but they worked on themselves and they overcame those things. They do well because they thrive in stressful work environments. That's actually their relaxed zone. And so number three is people in sales. They also have that competitive drive, maybe not on the level of an athlete, but financially they do. Maybe they grew up poor or neither side of their family was successful and they wanted to change that with sales, with a product or service, whatever their career is. But it is interesting to see. So all three people, the athlete, the person that overcame things, and then also the individual that just enjoys sales, they all have that for that fire in them that many people do not have naturally. That person can be trained and they can get that fire in them. But if they weren't one of the three before, it's going to be a little bit harder and it's going to take some time at first. So they definitely catch on the fastest and they get the quickest results. Everyone can get results, but with some, you just have to break down barriers, break down limiting beliefs, and really learn where that person is at, meeting the person where they're at, and then slowly building them up.
Interesting. Not the three I would have thought you'd come up with, but yeah.
Oh yeah, it's something that I noticed in the military, even in corporate, is that those people, they always did really well. And like growing up in Germany, and as you know, you're in Europe as well, or excuse me, you're in England. So just in general is that people watching. You could be at the coffee shop in your local town. You could be traveling, and just growing up, the European mentality is just eating outside, people watching, and just absorbing. So I would do that as a child. So I got that from my German side. And then my dad was Army. I would just be hyper aware of the room. He's like, always pay attention to who's in the room, what's going to happen. And so the person that's hyper aware, they can see and read people. So that's a common thing that I always notice. It's like, that guy carries himself. And then you look at their memorabilia or their backpack and their stuff. I'm like, oh, he looks like an athlete. Or then somebody else who just has calmness. They're just very calm and laid back. You're like, they've probably been through a lot of stuff, which made them so calm, and they have the confidence now. So it is interesting to see, but that's definitely three common things that I noticed. Those type of people, they get the fastest results, or they just catch on faster. Even if they're the brand new person, they usually surprise the boss or management. They're like, you already got that done? Like, yeah. And they're just like, I'm next. What's next? What's next? I'm here to learn.
So potentially controversial question. Certainly with two out of those three, the common theme seems to be that competitive streak.
Yes.
What do you think is more powerful, the competitiveness or the cooperative team spirit kind of side of it? Or do you think you need both?
I think a hybrid of both. The reason why is because sometimes, so in basketball, in the sport of basketball, there's a guy or female that's called the sixth man. And the sixth man, essentially, there's 5 people on the basketball court. The sixth man, he's the go-to male or female that they come in, they make the shot, and they get out. The sixth man, they're a team player. They don't always want to be in the game, but when it's crunch time, it's fourth quarter, there's 2 minutes left, they're like, we need your help. They thrive in that. They love that pressure. So some people are like that. They just want to be part of the team. They like the camaraderie, the team building. So that person is amazing to have. They usually don't want the leadership role or all the responsibilities. They're like, I don't really want all of his tasks. Like, Derick does too much. He does too much. Just let me know when you need me. I'll take care of it. Tap in, tap out. So I'll be there. So that person is truly needed. Very important role. And then on the flip side, the competitive person is good. But I have noticed, especially in sales, sometimes a competitive person, they suck at leadership because they're so good at what they do. They can't teach for crap. Like, the guy that's naturally good at sales, his numbers are always number one. And if somebody asks him like, hey, how do you use this system? He's like, system? I don't follow system. I do this. And then the management is like, no, please use the system so we can track stuff. It's like, we do know he's the anomaly and he crushes sales and he does help the company, but do not do things the way he does because we need to track the data. He's not tracking the data, so we're not going to know the analytics. His closing ratio is like 99%. That's rare to see, but please do not take his advice because it's going to be hard to track things. So sometimes the overly competitive person could not be a good teacher. But I do believe that that is the self-awareness. And then also, can the individual push pride and ego aside? Not everyone works well on a team because of their own pride and ego are in the way. The know-it-all, maybe they're good at what they do on paper, they're accomplished, but team building, communication skills, presentations, maybe they're not that great at those things because they're just like trying to rush through it. And I've noticed that the overly competitive person, they get annoyed with people that don't catch on as fast as they think they should. They're like, we've had 2 meetings about this. Why is this not done? It's like, hey, understandable. She learns differently. He learns differently. So the best leader, they can read everyone and then they can approach each person slightly different. You know what? Let's pull her aside before he embarrasses her in the meeting. Let's pull her aside and say, hey, what are you struggling with in the system, the program, whatever the workflow is? But I do believe the best leader has a hybrid. They can work with the team. They're self-aware. They're aware of their team, knowing how to approach each person. And then on the bad side, sometimes people that are overly competitive, they miss the other skills when they're just focused on competition.
It's interesting because particularly in the context of the salesperson, so there's this quite well-established problem about the accidental manager, which is the example that is usually given is the salesperson who's promoted into sales manager, let's say, and ends up being absolutely terrible, even though they're a brilliant salesperson.
Oh yeah,
and I've never heard it linked to the competitiveness side of it before, but it makes a lot more sense in that light, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's just like the pride and ego. And the funny thing about it, these are all patterns that people have had since childhood and their teenage years. So there's 2 types of good salespeople. There's a salesperson that's just like, I'm going to plow over everything and everyone, and I'm going to get what I want. And like they do well on numbers, but sometimes they'll say some sketchy stuff to get the end result. That's that person. And they're like the kid that always got their way. They have to get their way. They have to have control. They have to get all the attention. Like they're borderline narcissistic. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just is what it is. And then the other salesperson who's good, they do things more ethically. They care about their client, their customer. They're not seeing it as a transaction, it's more relational. So the extreme competitive person, they're just like transaction, got to hit my numbers. What do you mean you can't buy? Like they're overly aggressive. Sometimes they can work, but they kind of pressure and push people into the sale. And then the other one who's good at sales and numbers, they're more relational and they walk people through it. So it's more of taking them on a journey to really inform them. Do they need this product? Do they need this service? Are we on the wrong product or service? We have other options, whatever the individual scenario is. But I have noticed that that's common. And I like how you mentioned that the sales leader usually is the number one in sales, but then he's supposed to train people. He's like, I don't know, I've just always done it this way. And everybody's like, oh goodness, this is going to be an interesting training meeting. And he's like, hey, he has his own way.
Not at all interested.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I don't want to teach you. I want to be the number one here. I don't want you guys to catch up.
Yeah, it's quite mad to me actually. That I mean, it's not just sales, is it? But you could apply it to any function, really.
Oh yes.
But if you promote the person who's best at it just because of that, then they probably don't want to be the leader of that team. They're probably quite happy doing really well at what they're doing, and all you've done is removed your best performer from that team and given it a potentially terrible leader.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway. We could talk about that for hours and how to avoid that issue, but
for sure. And that right there is bad leadership as well, because sometimes people, they want to give up their responsibility. So like their driving force, the person that puts that salesperson in the position, they want to get rid of their own responsibility. So they choose. So they're like, let me get this off my plate, instead of saying, is he or she the right one for this? I know I want to get this off my plate, but maybe I need to wait 6 months until somebody else is more trained or more qualified. And everything goes back to pride and ego. I noticed that companies that have the worst energy, it's just always a ton of pride and ego in the way. Everybody's bumping heads, and it's like a reality show. You walk in, you sense the energy in the room. Even on a Zoom call, Google meeting, it's like, oh, it's going to be an interesting Monday meeting. goodness, why are we here?
Yes. Yeah. I think, the virtual meeting gets a lot of bad attention, doesn't it? But you can still read quite a lot from the body language, I find.
Oh, definitely. 100%.
Yeah. It's not quite as good as in person, but it's pretty close. But yeah. I think that whole thing around the sales and the different approaches, I think, I don't know, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization. And of course, it will depend on the industry and what you're trying to sell. But I feel like the more kind of relationship-based consultative approach, I think the higher value the thing you're trying to sell, the more important that is.
Oh, yes.
Whereas the lower value stuff, you can afford to just see it as a numbers game, I guess, and be a bit more brutal about the way you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is what I like about nowadays with the information age, is it does show that now, at least what I've seen, even like my mentors or people I work with, is they're more honest about their sales. Like they'll tell somebody, like, you don't necessarily need these things. You just need this one thing. So you don't need this package. And if it's not a product, maybe it's a service. And they're like, hey, I know you came for this, but this would actually be better because of where you're at. What would you like to do? And it's more so a question, like they present them two things and go from there. But I noticed that does really well, because then it seems more natural and nobody feels sold. The salesperson doesn't feel bad afterwards. They get the commission check or the Stripe payment or PayPal, whatever it was. They don't feel bad. And then on the flip side, the person, the customer or client, they don't feel like they were pressured, or the next morning or that night at dinner, they're like, I don't even buy this. Oh, I was pushed into a corner verbally or pressure wise. And then they want a refund. They want to return the product. They don't want the service and all that. But the people that are just more transparent and honest, they have the less refunds or chargebacks, because everything is so out there. Like, here's what we're going to cover. How does that work for you? And the person's like, oh, that's what it is. No questions. Perfect. We're on the same page. And so I've noticed that that's becoming more common. So at least in the United States, the corporate old school way of sales is totally outdated here. And you can instantly tell who's still stuck in that zone, because they're very robotic and scripted. And I tell my friends, I'm like, oh yeah, he speaks like a robot. He's just following his little script. Scripts can work, frameworks can work. But if somebody's in the old school way, they lose touch of communication skills. They're like, well, first you're going to need this product. And you're like, goodness, let's turn that off. Nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah, I guess the other aspect of the information age is it's very easy for people, while they're even on the phone with you, to just look up what you're saying.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And so, if you're that type of, I'll say anything to get the sale sort of salesperson, it'll be very quick, I suspect. Oh, yeah. And they'll be off the phone before you know it. Yeah.
100%.
What is it that really, truly motivates and inspires you in what you do?
So what inspires me the most is making my inner child proud, making him proud. He went through a lot of things, and it's just interesting because I used to be, number one, physically, I was very skinny and I was bullied at home. So just full transparency, both sides of my family have extreme alcoholism. And so when I was a child, when I turned 11, between 11 and 17, there was a lot of rage at home, but it only happened at night between the hours of 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And so it was never about me. I had good grades, was never in trouble, never been to prison, like never did anything bad except for the typical teenage things, sneaking out. But in general, I noticed that they did not get the deep help that they needed with their trauma from their upbringing of their childhood or their careers or anything else that happened personally. And so when they would drink after social settings, they were super positive around people, the life of the party and all that. Popular people knew them everywhere, successful. But when the door closed and the last sip of alcohol was drank, they would just release whatever they needed to release, anger, aggression, emotions. And excuse me, I just became that physical and verbal punching bag. So because of that, that was happening at home all the time. I was very skinny. I was a child that lived in Germany. We moved to the United States. It was a culture shock going to a school in the United States, because it's just like the movies. You got the locker, you got the bully, you got the this. And like, I was getting bullied the same way that you see in the American movies. And I was like, oh, this is a culture shock. And so because I mix, mother's German, dad is African American, people didn't know what I was. So bullied at home, skinny, insecure, bullied at school. I had a bad stuttering problem. I didn't public speak because I was just very timid, very closed off. So completely different person. So number one is to make him proud because of the person that I was able to create, and then also be able to teach other people And I can see in somebody's body language or their eyes when they're going through something, or if they're just carrying something from the past. And so being able to heal myself to then heal others is an amazing feeling. So the fulfillment is knowing that people got over their traumas. I call it bad patterns, whatever their pattern is. For some people, the pattern could be alcohol. For some, it could be anger, like they're good and something pulls them back, but everything relates back to teenage years or childhood years, why they carry these things with them. And so those are the things that we face. And so we break those patterns so they can feel like they can thrive and not just survive. As in, they're not carrying said breakup with them into everything, or traumatic thing that happened with their parents with them, or if they've had 2 divorces, they're not having this limiting belief of I'm going to die alone. So for some, it's extreme, whatever they have internally. And for some, it's subtle, but they have 20 subtle things that are holding them back. So those are specifically what we work on. So the most fulfilling thing is seeing people getting their power back. So the holidays just passed. I love going on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, seeing current clients and past clients, and I can just sense the light is in their eye again. They lost the weight, they got a promotion, she's in her first healthy relationship, whatever that specific thing is, their kids are happy. And then I know months or years before, the look on their face and that look in their eyes was totally different. And if somebody doesn't relate to that, we all, or most of us, have Facebook. Whenever your Facebook memory pops up and you see an old picture in school or college and you're like, oh yeah, look at that fake smile. And you can sense what you're going through at that time period. Even if you're smiling, your eyes can tell you everything. So definitely being able to use that pain as fuel to help other people and to help them get their power back is essentially the full circle thing. And I would say it's very interesting that people that are good at what they do, they usually have a backstory that relates to why they took that path, or maybe they had to take that path and it just made them better because they've witnessed a lot of life where it's not just scholastically and just textbooks or just training, it's also life. So in my opinion, I think if you can have both, you can go really far with it. You have the education, certification, etc., but you also have life experiences. Put those together, that becomes an amazing teacher. And they just speak in a different way because they've lived it, rather than just Professor Smith, who speaks like a robot and he's just teaching, and you're just like, oh yeah, this guy has no personal communication skills, but he means well, but we don't feel it.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there. First of all, really sorry to hear you had those experiences. But I think secondly, this really speaks, I think, to the best, most successful coaches are the ones who have actually lived it exactly as you say, both because it drives them to help people, particularly people who are going through those same experiences. But also I think it gives a massive amount of credibility to what they're saying. Because
yes.
I often use the marketing coach as the example in this one, because there's quite a few of them out there who are, let's say, cowboys. We've all encountered them. I'm sure anyone who's on LinkedIn will have had a few messages from someone like this at some point, if not in the last 20 minutes.
5 sentences, 5 paragraphs.
Yeah.
10 reasons I'm awesome. Let's book a call.
Yeah. And they're trying to sell you these like the multi-million marketing approaches and all of this. And, you can spend 5 or 10 minutes. You go and look them up on the Company's House in the UK. Is it the SEC has the register in the US? But it's wherever you get the company information, you go and look up their company, and they've turned over like
we call 2,000. You have the Better Business Bureau,
right?
The BBB, and then there's also a Trustpilot, which some people could leave a review, and they have the rating on there.
So I think that's where the best coaches usually are, is in having been there, done that, walked the talk, all of those other cliches. And so I think, totally agree with you there. It was a long-winded way of saying that, but yeah. Right, let's talk a bit more about leadership then.
Yes.
From all of your experiences, all your career so far, what would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned?
Knowing how to actively listen. And what I mean by that is really seeing what the individual needs. Because sometimes it might be a stressful situation, but as a leader, when we can push pride and ego aside and we can just say, hey, Michelle, is there anything that you need that we didn't give you or I didn't give you? She might say training on this program, systems, or we actually need this, because the best leader can ask good questions and they can actively listen, which makes everything better, whether that's a one-on-one conversation or a team conversation. Because if they speak to the expert in the company, they can learn from them and then they can figure out more information. From the bird's eye view, most management or bosses, they think everything is smooth because we hit our KPIs for the year or quarterly, whatever it is. And then we see our team and our team is ripping their hair out. And it's like, wait, but our numbers are good. And they're like, yes, but we have an outdated system. Like there's so many better programs and software we could use, or a CRM. So definitely being able to actively listen, because then they can learn from the people that are actually doing the day-to-day who can teach you. And then from there, you win together because they're like, hey, I found this program. It's $79.99 a month per user. We have 10 people on the team. If we use this, it's going to cost more the first 2 months, but we're going to get such a result because we're going to use less time to input the information. So at first it's a cost, but long-term, we're going to make so much money. And if somebody is open to hear that, they could say, wow, that makes sense. I appreciate it. Then they look at their current program. And in the United States, it's just, we look at it as that's the old school corporate way, the individual that cannot listen and is not open for change. They're like, we've always done it this way. It's like, I understand, but it's 2024 now. Like your team stress and your turnover rates are crazy. Like it's not by surprise. It's usually bad management or outdated processes because nobody has a training platform or has enough training and education. So definitely actively listen, because then they can really sense what's going on, whether that's with a team or an individual. And number two, I would say knowing how to approach people. And that gets better after actively listening, because then they can read the room better. From a spiritual or religious standpoint, people call that discernment. So being able to read a person or a group where they're at and going from there. But if somebody has that skill, they communicate with people differently. So an extreme example in the military, the knife hand, that's how they talk to you, the yelling, they'll embarrass you in front of everybody. Sometimes it works and it's needed if somebody makes stupid mistakes over and over, but the other times it's not needed because maybe that person is going through something dark in their personal life. And if they're embarrassed in front of 100 soldiers, something worse might happen. So if they can identify, you know what, she's not being himself, he's not being himself, let's not point them out and single them out. Let's pull them to a side. And only good leaders can do that, because others, pride and ego goes back to that. It's in the way. They're like, we need to get stuff done. It's a new year. It's a new month. We need to hit our numbers. Like, hey, that sounds amazing. But have you ever asked your team, how are you doing? How are you actually doing? And really learning about your individuals. Like everyone's different. Maybe somebody just lost their dog or their grandma or had a breakup or whatever it was. And if they're not a good leader, they're going to be like, oh, well, suck it up, drive on, let's get it done. So definitely caring about your team, still getting the job done and having deadlines, but really building that camaraderie. They should feel comfortable to talk to whoever the leader is.
Definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, whatever the outcome, good or bad, I think it should never be a surprise to the leader.
Yes.
So that the kind of, there are quite a few traps of bad leaders in there that I think you've covered quite nicely, but the one who gets lost in the KPIs and forgets the fact that the more time passes, the more the duck's feet are kicking under the water and they're not noticing. And then they are surprised when a bunch of people leave because they just can't handle it anymore.
Exactly.
It's a 3-stage process, I think, which you've talked through there. It's asking the right questions, the insightful questions, the ones that are going to get you to the right answers, then actively listening to those answers and taking on board what you're being told, putting the ego aside, putting whatever your own perception of the situation might be, putting that on a shelf for the time being. And then I think the third step, where a lot of people, even with the best of intentions, fall short, is then following up on that afterwards, doing something about it. Because there's no good, as active listening as you can be, there's no good hearing the answer and then not doing anything to solve the problem afterwards.
Oh yeah, we've all been in a position or career where we had somebody, oh yeah, thanks, we're going to get around to that. We'll definitely make sure you have that information. 2 weeks later, you're like, I'm drowning in tasks. Do you have that thing? Oh no, we're still working on it. It's like, it takes 5 minutes. Like, order the thing, get whatever we needed. So sometimes people, they'll actively listen just to give you a response of what you want to hear, but they really don't help you in the end.
And to be fair to a lot of them, it's probably because they can't. They're just not in a position to do anything about it. But I think, again, the mistake is to not be open and upfront about that and just say that straight away.
Oh, yes.
I was always taught listen, take the answer on board, and then if you can do something about it, say you'll do your best. If you can't, say that as well and explain why, because otherwise you're going to create that exact situation you've just described where they just fall flat and you lose trust, you lose their respect. Next time you have one of those conversations, they won't be as forthcoming, and then it's a vicious circle all the way to the bottom of the drain, isn't it?
Exactly. And then they wonder why the turnover rate is crazy, or people want to give up their responsibilities and go down a row. And it's a common thing that I've noticed is that companies that repeatedly do the same thing, and then they just blame the people. Well, the workflow, the young generation doesn't do this and this, or whatever thought that they have to overshadow that they suck at leadership. They're like, well, this new generation of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, they don't have blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're still doing outdated processes. Like you have people doing paperwork, which takes them an hour. They should have an iPad and tap, 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 and it's done.
Yeah, or AI. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd love to know what you think is the most common mistake that the majority of leaders will make. Is it what we just talked about, or is there something else?
I do think it's not getting feedback from their team. So I would say in combination of what we discussed, but having a open door policy. That's what the military refers to it as a lot, and a lot of corporate companies, but open door policy as in, if there's a problem, please let me know. But that leader has to speak it where they can feel it. And he's not just, nobody feels like he's saying it just to say it because it's in the company handbook and policy. Like, we have open door policy, but don't knock on my door. It's like, that's how most management is, or bosses. But leaders, if they have an open door policy, everyone should feel more comfortable. If they do have something personal, there should be a certain level of trust there. And going back to life happens to everyone on a personal level. So if something is happening and somebody does need 2 days off to grieve a family loss or whatever it was, can they have the ability and the confidence to walk into their management's office or send that email or give them a call or Microsoft Teams, whatever program that they use? Do they feel comfortable to do that? Or will they never do that? Because they're like, I don't want to annoy them because I feel like they're going to be singled out, embarrassed. Because sometimes management is like that. They'll send out an email after somebody asks and told the situation. They're like, by the way, please do not. And they use that person as an example. And it's very condescending. It's very embarrassing. But definitely having an open door policy to build the team morale. And do they actually know something about the people? They should know a little bit of something about the team. An example could be, are they married? Do they have kids? Do they have pets? What is their hobby? The basic things of what drives that person. And a leader that truly cares, they know those things, and they'll actually legitimately ask those questions. Monday meeting, before it starts, everybody's chit-chatting. Hey, how was your holiday? How's your uncle? I know you mentioned last time this and this. And the person's going to be surprised because the leader actually actively listened and remembered what they said. Because on the flip side, it's going to be really robotic and fake, the old corporate way. So definitely having an open door policy to build that team. Because teams that get along the most or that know about each other, they respect each other. Even if they don't really personally like each other because they have totally different views, if the mutual respect is both ways, the team's going to grow together because they at least know where they stand. I'd rather a team be black and white, as in everything's transparent. It's like, hey, you don't like me, I don't like you, but I know you're the expert and I'm the expert, so we can help each other. Let's fist pump. And it's like, it's so straightforward. It's a mutual respect. So that's how me and some of my friends are. We have totally different views, but because we're so transparent and honest, we respect each other. We're like, this is awesome, because it's very rare. So you can do the same thing with a company.
I like that. I think, the open door thing, you're right. It reminds me of, I guess, authenticity, really. It's kind of having that alignment between your values and your internal dialogue versus what you're actually saying, and then finally what you're actually doing. And that open door thing is a good example of that, isn't it? Because, again, we've all encountered those bosses, those managers who just go through the motions. They say it because it's in the staff handbook, or they think it's what people need to hear. And then when it comes to actually a problem or actually needing to have that conversation, the door is firmly slammed shut in your face.
Sure. You can always sense it quick on how a manager or boss or whoever it is, whoever's in charge, you can always sense how they act to stressful situations, to questions, and just to people. Are they open to get feedback? because that's honestly the best way to learn. So even when I was in the Army, I did satellite communications, and there were some guys that knew more about the satellite, like the specifics of it, than I did. I could set it up, give everybody internet and radio. We could be anywhere in the middle of the woods, in the side of a mountain, and we can make stuff happen to radio. So I knew how to get stuff connected where everything works. But when it came to the troubleshooting, I only knew so much. But there's guys that were experts that dove way deeper into it. They're like 5 levels deeper than me, the programming and all that. And I knew I could ask them for questions. And that's why they always enjoyed coming to my team, because they knew we're going to crack jokes. We're going to be human. We're going to have a real conversation while they're helping us do the thing. And then we appreciate them. We trade food, especially if we're in the middle of the woods. But it's just an old school way of doing things. And what you mentioned earlier, the authenticity. If you just respect somebody for what they do and what they bring to the table, they appreciate it. Because all humans honestly just want 2 things. They want to be heard and understood. Heard and understood. If we can make them feel that, then it's mutual respect. Because people have skill sets, but it's rare that many people in management will appreciate, hey, Jimmy, thanks for what you're doing. Hey, Andrew, thanks for this. Hey, David and Derek, I appreciate what you 2 do. If it wasn't for you guys, we'd be effed or we'd be screwed, because nobody knows how to handle or troubleshoot these things. So simply acknowledging your team and getting out of that robotic corporate way, because it's a slippery slope.
100%, 100%. And I think it's a powerful and important lesson, not just for leadership, but just interacting every day with your colleagues or in your family. You know, it's almost universal, isn't it?
Exactly.
Slight tangent from that. What advice would you give a new manager, first-time leader, who is struggling to establish themselves in their role?
I would suggest that he or she finds the top performing people and either shadow them if you have enough time for that, or ask them questions. If they can learn, so let's just say it's day 1 for that individual. They can find the best salesman. They can find the best tech guy, whatever industry they're in, and they can just ask 3 to 5 questions. Hey, what is the most common thing you see? What do you recommend with this? Maybe it's very direct, maybe it's as a whole. But if they can learn from the top dogs in their field within the company, they can get a lot of clarity. And then they can start to connect the dots, because everything's still a learning process for that new manager. But if they're open enough to ask that question, people are going to respect them as well. So in the military, it was very common that if an officer came in the Army, like he just got out of training in college, and now he's leading 60, 70 soldiers, and everybody's like, oh, who's this guy? Because they know he just came from training school and he doesn't have experience being with soldiers. It's just more school training. Here you are. Now you're a higher rank than all of us. We've been in here 10 years. We've been to Iraq, Afghanistan. So we're supposed to respect you. But if he or she comes in asking questions and they're like, oh, I thought this was going to be the prick that's like, look at my rank. I'm higher than you. And so making sure that they can ask questions. But that is definitely one of the most effective things. Find the best and the highest performing people, ask questions. Maybe they're not available. Just send an email or attach everyone in the email and just say, hey, my intent with this email, I am the new XYZ manager. I just want to ask, what are some things, or what are 5 things that you would recommend that you've seen? And then get that feedback. Maybe it's a chain email with all the top people, or maybe it's a one-on-one verbal conversation, but it's just going to give them clarity. And then the top performing people, they'll appreciate that they were asked, which means they're like, oh, this new person is open to learn, which means they're open to change, and they're open for me to give an opinion. And that new person doesn't just come in and say, well, in my last company, we did it this way. So I'm here now. We're going to change everything. And it's like, wait a minute. Do we have to reinvent the wheel, or is the wheel already successful?
Yeah. And when you're that new, you can't possibly know the right answer to that question, can you? You need to understand the context before you decide whether it needs to change.
Exactly.
I think what I like most about that is it's showing humility as well as the leader. It's showing respect for the expertise of the people you're leading, as well as their opinions, as you mentioned. And I think it's also, it kind of, one part of the aspect of a leader of a particularly a larger team is understanding the roles of all the people within that team, because ultimately, if the worst happens, you're going to need to ensure that those roles are still carried out without that person being there necessarily. So again, it's a knowledge, it's a knowing your team, knowing the people, knowing the work. And if you can't grasp all of those things, you're not going to be a very good leader of that team in particular.
Oh, yes. Exactly. And they just have to be open to learn from others. And those are always the best leaders. Because honestly, leadership, personal development is just one long journey of learning. Just never stop learning, and they just keep getting better. And that's why people are good at what they do. They failed a lot. They fell on their face a lot. They messed up, but they also were open to learn. And then eventually they've seen almost everything, and they're like, hey, here's how to handle it. And then they're the most calm leader, because they're like, oh, I've seen this 25 times. It may have been 2 years, but here's what we did last time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could go back in time to when you started your first ever job, what would you say to your younger self?
I would tell him that you are where you should be. My first job was in a sports store selling shoes, selling merchandise. I was socially awkward, and I made myself do that because I was like, I need to get out of this shell. I need to sell shoes, because back then I loved sports, memorabilia, all that. And so I put myself in that position, and I basically had to become charismatic and better with people because I was not as a child and teen. I was socially awkward. I stuttered and overthinking and all kind of stuff. So that helped me a ton. I didn't realize how much it helped me until I got older. And then I saw people older than me who did not have that skill. And I was like, you survived this long without knowing how to speak to people? Goodness, life must be hard. So definitely you're in the right place. That's what I would tell him.
Oh, nice to hear that. I have to say, yeah, there's a self-awareness thing there as well. Good lesson there in recognizing what you need to improve on and then actually forcing yourself to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, massively applaud that. Definitely. And I think the other thing really about leadership, and I think we take it from that example as well, is the power of networking and putting yourself out there and meeting as many different faces and voices as you can, because all of that just is the experience that's going to make you better in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the huge thing people are missing. They don't put themselves out there, and then they wonder why they're not good. And you're like, experience, skill, time, patience. Goes back to the basics, because now everything is quick. So that is the downside to some things. People are still looking for the quick. So earlier you mentioned the AI. People are using AI. It's 50-50. It can be good. It can be bad. But some people they're missing the skills and like the work ethic. So if they can definitely just work on that, then they'll feel better about themselves as well.
Definitely. I think the AI is not at the point yet where it could sell people things and convince them to buy or do things. At least I hope it's not. Maybe it is and we don't realise, but best not dwell on that.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, last question. This one is usually my favourite question. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious even, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
I would say Greg Plitt. Greg Plitt is one of my favorite men ever. And who Greg Plitt was, he passed away several years ago, but I would say 7 years ago. He was a U.S. Army parachute team leader, as in like they did shows jumping out of planes with the parachutes. So it was the Army Black Knights. But also he was a ranger. So he was in the U.S. Army, he was a ranger, and then that was his military career. And then he went into modeling and acting. And then he was also a motivational speaker. So military, and then he was helping people with their body. So physical fitness, mental fitness, nutrition. But then also he would travel the world and speak at expos, and he would have the most lines of people that were just have their life changed. He helped people lose weight, get off addiction, and so forth. But he's truly a great example. If you go on YouTube and just search Greg Plitt, Plitt, he's definitely one of those that you can watch a compilation video and you just get into its zone. Outside of the motivation and inspiration, it's just his intensity for life. He would jump out of planes, do this, help the kids, help his families just nonstop, and just truly there to really help people. And then knowing his backstory. So I related a lot to that because he was the anomaly. He did everything that I wanted to do. Because in the Army, they're like, modeling and acting, well, you should not do that. And then I saw him, I'm like, wait a minute, he was in it and he did this. And then he helped people and he was humble and he was learning. So all those different traits, it was just amazing to see. And so what originally got me into him was his website. This is probably like 2009 is when I found him. And so on his website, he would just talk about depression, anxiety, all the topics that men usually don't speak about, he would talk about in hour-long videos on his website. Nowadays, some individuals do that on YouTube, but back then he had a website and then he had training programs and all that. And it was life-changing. He would just be standing in his house, hit record and just talk. And he didn't have to because he was already making millions with Hollywood and everything. But it was just amazing to see. So he could be on set at a Marvel movie, the next day speaking at a kindergarten, the next day at a social event, the next day he'd be at your local gym, just talking to the people at the desk. And it's just a normal guy who's just like, he goes all in on his goals and helps people. So I would definitely say Greg Plitt from a military standpoint, as a man, disciplined, but also as a leader, being able to give back and guide people in the right way.
Hard to think of a better definition of hero there than he was life-changing. There you go.
Oh, yes.
I feel like I should know him or recognize him, but
I bet that you'll recognize his face when you see him. What's interesting about him, his body, his physique was used a lot in Marvel movies.
Okay.
So like Green Lantern, I know there's been various Green Lanterns, most are terrible, but they actually use his body on the character. I think Ryan Reynolds or whoever played that version, they use his physique. So a lot of times Hollywood would use his physique in Marvel movies. And so he was on a few shows and stuff, but you probably recognize his voice. Many, especially on social media, like those motivational videos where they have different speakers, they use his voice a lot, where it's intense, it's very in your face, but it's always in regards to helping build people up. So essentially, he was like the white David Goggins before David Goggins was famous. So like before I knew who David Goggins was, I was listening to Greg Plitt, because David Goggins was not, I guess, famous or not popular outside of the military back then. So Greg Plitt was doing all that as well. So if somebody's into like that mentality, then they might resonate with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, thank you for sharing. It was a good pick. And it's one we've not had before as well. So that always gets bonus points.
Awesome. Cool.
Awesome. Well, Derick, it's been great talking with you today. Last thing I'll ask you is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you or what you do, perhaps get in touch and work with you. Is there a website or similar that you'd like to point them towards?
Yes, for sure. That'll be fitwithderick.com, fitwithderick.com. That's my website for coaching. They would see that some clients are strictly fitness and performance, and some are all personal, as in life coaching. So the example, overcoming traumas, overcoming psychological issues, bad relationship with food. They would see pictures and videos of clients, and they might relate to somebody, their journey, getting their power back, which that's all it is. So essentially somebody, they can breathe again because that knot is gone. They released it and they have control again. And on social media, it is Fit with Derick 2. That is the number 2, Fit with Derick 2. My whole intent with social media is to plant seeds. When somebody hits snooze too many times, I'm going to call them out in a video and they're going to be like, I need to get out of bed. So I'm just that guy that's going to be in somebody's corner so they're not wasting their potential. But it's just all about making people think, where I'm in their head and they're like, yeah, I need to stop eating this stuff. Too much sugar.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Particularly this time of year as well.
Oh yeah, exactly. Holidays just finished. January. Everybody's new year, new me.
Yeah. All the leftover Christmas chocolate as well. That's burning a hole in my fridge. Anyway, well, thank you again, Derick, for being so generous with your time and your stories and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great rest of your day as well.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much, Derick, for that conversation. We went down some interesting paths that we've not really touched on in this podcast before, so that's always a great thing. Really appreciate your time there. Thank you so much. Listener, if you want to learn more about Derick, get in touch with him, perhaps see about working with him, check the episode description and you'll find all of the relevant information to do so. If you are a new leader, a first-time founder even, and you're struggling with leadership, getting the best from your team, and just building that genuine connection with your people, if you are feeling that isolation and loneliness that so many new leaders struggle with, then I have a solution for you. It is called Integrity Leaders. It is an online leadership community where you can get access to leadership development content, learning materials, live sessions, other resources, early access to these podcast episodes as well, and join a community of leaders who are in a similar stage of their careers as you, who you can meet and share experiences, learn from each other, and build lasting relationships. Because at the end of the day, every leader is reliant upon their people and their network. So we can help you with both of those things. All of this for a much more affordable price than the average leadership development program or executive coach. Check out the link to learn more, sign up for my newsletter, and you will get an invitation to join the Integrity Leaders community. You can have 60 days complimentary access. After that, you can either choose to become a subscriber and pay the small monthly fee, or there's a free forever option as well. Hope to see you there. If you would like any more information, click on the link in the episode description. It is www.leadernotaboss.com, or find me on LinkedIn and drop me a message and we can have a chat. And that's all from me today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with us. I hope you'll join me again next week, when I'll be joined by Anthony Lavopa, who is a leadership coach and an active serving officer in the US Navy. So he has some great insights on leadership, some interesting stories, and some interesting answers to some of my questions. I hope to see you then. In the meantime, be a leader, not a boss.